Hello, everybody, and good evening. My name is Don Arlith, and welcome to World Talks. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin may meet as early as next week. Ahead of those talks, whose location is still unknown, Russia wants only Trump-Putin meeting, while Americans are pushing for some Ukrainian involvement. Could we finally be on the cusp of a major announcement that after 3 years since the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, could there be a ceasefire? The chances have never been better, so is it possible, and what might a peace agreement entail? Joining me now to discuss is Joshua Burgin, founder of the Alliance for Global Security. Joshua, thank you for joining us, and it's great to see you again.
Donald, good to be with you tonight.
Yes, so we're all sitting here nervously awaiting what tomorrow may bring. And of course, we're all looking forward to this potential meeting between Trump and Putin. What is, if I can ask you to indulge in crystal ball reading, what is your thoughts? Is the ceasefire possible that we could achieve and see a cease of hostilities in Ukraine as early as next week?
Well, Donald Trump's been calling for it for a while. But to be candid, as a real estate executive, effectively a small business owner, even a multi-billion-dollar small business owner with lots of subcontractors, I don't think he fully understands the contours of how a state, certainly a state like Russia, functions, and the degree to which the Russians are masters of deception. Every single time Putin crosses the line or refuses to play ball effectively with Donald Trump, it's a spit in the face, because Donald Trump effectively extended him an olive branch, an ability to climb down off the ledge, going back, throughout earlier parts of this year and part of last. And unfortunately, the Russians have effectively just sort of swatted his hand and disrespected him ever since. So I'm a little skeptical as to what next week's potential meeting is going to lead out to.
Well, let's talk about the building pressure on Vladimir Putin. I mean, it's just recently we've seen extra 25%, bringing the total up to 50% tariffs on India for their role in importing vast amounts of Russian oil. There's the threat of the sanctions coming, secondary sanctions coming up tomorrow on Friday, as well as we've heard just recently that Donald Trump has said that Russia poses a grave security threat to the United States. Do you think that the use of the stick here is what it sort of seems? Does that have Russia actually concerned about these next steps?
Well, they only respect power. And so if I were in the president's shoes, if I were advising the president, I would have sort of absolutely questioned why there was a 50-day timeline, why even now we're sort of playing around with it. Hit hard, go intense, lay down the sanctions with the olive branch of, hey, I'm looking to meet you next week and hoping to make a deal. The president has been, claims to be good at this. I think in cases he has been good at this, but I think any sort of tiptoeing around the Russians and not literally backing them up against the wall is a mistake. I know that many people wring their hands about, oh, don't back them too far against the wall. Putin has limited escape routes at this point. Exploit that and be the only escape route he's got.
Now, Vladimir Putin has been reluctant to include Zelensky in this round. He's been pushing more for direct talks with Donald Trump. Why do you think this is? Why do you think that Vladimir Putin resists this meeting that even Volodymyr Zelensky has called for?
Well, there's multiple points on this. I mean, Putin for a long time has sought to be a big man from a relatively small country, not geographically, but economically and now militarily around the world. And so a direct one-on-one meeting with the president of the United States puts him squarely in the media headlines he wants to be in, including a Volodymyr Zelensky, whom he views as beneath him, inferior and illegitimate, puts them at basically the same level, with the president of the United States, of course, being asymmetrically higher than both of them. Putin doesn't want this. Frankly speaking, I think the president, again, should lean on all the sticks possible and demand that as the meeting point. But let's see what comes next week.
Right. Now, from Ukraine's perspective, what do you think their expectations are from this upcoming potential meeting between Trump and Putin?
Well, I noted with some interest a tweet or a LinkedIn post about 4 hours ago from Ursula von der Leyen, in which she talked about having spoken with Zelensky and having a detailed conversation about what next steps might look like, including a negotiated settlement. I find that specific terminology interesting. I'm not necessarily enthusiastic about it, but the notion that the nominal, the head of the EU is having that sort of conversation suggests there may be more at play than simply the White House having a tete-a-tete or a one-on-one with Putin. Um, you probably have another question set, and I will just go just a tiny bit further. There was a June 12th poll put out by the Peace Through Strength Institute polling U.S. citizenry, and indeed there was very, very dim view on the part of the U.S. electorate to Ukraine having to surrender land for peace. And I too would think that to be a grave mistake if that is part of the negotiation efforts on the part of the EU or the United States with regard to Ukraine.
Well, there's also been discussions about a Korea-style ending, that right now a cease of hostilities and the territory that Russia controls stays under Russian control, not, I guess, de facto, not de jure. And this ball will be just kicked down to another generation. I mean, could it actually be a potential for peace in this mode for Ukraine just to leave this off for another day?
At the end of the day, this is all above our pay grade. But I think if that's the starting premise, that the assumption is Russia's keeping land, I think sends a really bad signal to the rest of the world. Engage in a war, push into territory that's not yours. So long as you don't have someone bigger than you coming to batter you back, you get to keep it. The rules-based order that everyone has spoken of with such enthusiasm for the last few years around these topics, I think gets really battered if Russia's able to get away with this in this sense. So even if that's the ultimate reality, starting with that language, I think is a big mistake. I'm also not a huge fan of the Koreastyle, where you have a constantly policed border, because that represents cost to everyone for decades to come. And if that is the reality, then I think Ukraine absolutely must be a part of Europe and part of NATO as well. When I say Europe, I mean the EU as well as NATO as well, because this is the only thing that will prevent the Russians from crossing that border again in the future.
And amongst all these recent developments, we haven't heard much from France or the United Kingdom or the coalition of the willing. Is this still a possibility that European forces would go into Ukraine if a ceasefire is reached and, be able to verify and check that the fighting is indeed ceased? And, what is the potential for this coalition of the willing, do you think, at this point?
Well, one thing to note, in the past 3 years, throughout the beginning and now to the current point in Russia's war on Ukraine, is that Europe has finally woken up to what is now a decades-long ask on the part of the United States to increase their defense spending through their participation at NATO. This said, we're now in this place where at the beginning of the war, it seemed that both France and Germany just wanted to go back to the status quo, business as usual. It seems they finally woken up to the fact that that is not going to be the reality, but still have yet to sort of say, okay, we're willing to put serious skin in the game. They're making forward progress. I don't want to diminish that, but it's not quite to the level to say, okay, Russia is an economy smaller than Italy. Russia is a much smaller population than we are. We are going to put them in their place once and for all, and they're no longer going to screw around with us and our allies, erstwhile in this case Ukraine. We've not seen that yet, and I kind of long for the day in which the language of European strategic autonomy and or their own abilities to defend themselves were turned into actionable steps in terms of their own arms production and a willingness to commit troops to places that might be difficult, such as a potentially settled border between Russia and Ukraine.
Now, Joshua, just to finish up here, if next week we see no progress made between the Presidents Zelensky and, between Presidents Putin and President Trump, what's next for the United States? What's next for Ukraine?
Well, increasingly, I believe Donald Trump will come under pressure. I mean, Putin's status quo is pressure. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, will end up with a good bit of egg on his face because a number of people will go back and recount. I'll end this in 24 hours, sort of recount the many talking points along the way where things began to move. And now after a high stakes event in which something should come of it. If nothing comes of it, I think the president will have very little option but to ramp up or escalate even further the tools he has within his arsenal to put pressure on the Russians. It's not lost on me that not only is Russia where it is, but China recently even sort of openly acknowledged that it doesn't want a settlement between Ukraine. It doesn't want that conflict to de-escalate because then it is concerns around the U.S. And frankly, China's involvement in all of this is deeply concerning for the United States and much of Europe, as evidenced not only in factoid, but in polling across the continent.
Well, and following up on that, as far as the sanctions go, secondary sanctions, is that something that the United States would be able to enforce well with China and with, I guess, with India as well?
I mean, enforcement ends up being a certain question. At this point, though, however, I think political will is a bigger issue on the U.S. side. The Senate has been threatening for a while, and the White House has been saying, no, let's hold back. I think every point at which the U.S. chooses not to engage on the question of sanctions or chooses not to create consequence for Russia, Russia takes that as a green light. There's an assumption that the Russians behave like we do in the West and Western Europe and the United States. They do not. They respond well to force. Anything else they perceive as a yellow light or even a green light, they take advantage of. It's the nature of how their society and their government especially has functioned for a long time. And I'll resolve with the notion that Donald Trump and much of his staff is at a key disadvantage when facing off with the former head of the KGB, having all those resources at hand. And indeed, Mr. Lavrov is one of those as well. There's decades of experience, and as much as I have great respect for the Secretary of State, from my home state, former U.S. Senator, even he has to be aware that he's at a decided disadvantage when dealing with someone with such institutional knowledge dating back decades.
Well, I guess at this point, we should hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Joshua Burgin, founder of the Alliance for Global Security, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me today.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thanks for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.